The Family Feud stage was live, and the cameras were rolling when 74-year-old Earl Whitmore reached across the center podium and slapped Steve Harvey across the left cheek with an open hand. Not hard enough to hurt. Hard enough to be unmistakable. Hard enough for the microphones to pick up the sound. For the audience of 300 people to gasp as one organism. For 3 security guards to move from their positions simultaneously. Steve Harvey did not flinch. He did not grab Earl's wrist. He did not step back. He stood exactly where he was, turned his head slowly back to face Earl Whitmore, and said 7 words in the most controlled voice anyone in that room had ever heard. "You just ended yourself." I didn't. The next 19 minutes would become the most legally and morally complex moment in the show's history, and the most watched, with over 310 million combined views. Because what Steve Harvey did after those 7 words was the kind of thing that makes people believe that certain human beings were placed on Earth at exactly the right time, for exactly the right reason. It was a Friday afternoon, September 6, 2019, in Atlanta, Georgia. The Whitmore family from Savannah, Georgia, had driven to the taping in 2 cars. Earl Whitmore was the patriarch, 74 years old, retired pipe fitter. A large man with thick hands, and the bearing of someone who had spent his life believing that his physical presence settled arguments. His granddaughter, Lacey, 22, had submitted the application and practically begged the family to do it. She thought it would be fun. She thought it would be something to remember. She was right. His wife, June, stood beside him at the podium and spent the first 2 rounds touching his arm occasionally. The quiet gesture of a woman who had been monitoring and managing her husband's behavior for 49 years of marriage. They were playing against the Okafor family from Atlanta, a Nigerian-American family. 5 members. Warm and competitive. The kind of family that makes noise when they win and makes more noise when they lose and loves every second of being alive. The first 2 rounds had been close and loud and perfectly normal. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. Earl Whitmore had been growing more agitated since the first round. It was subtle, the kind of agitation that June recognized and that everyone else attributed to competitive energy. He missed 2 answers he thought were obvious. He buzzed in once on a question he couldn't answer. His score was the lowest of his family's 5 players, and he had been standing with his arms crossed between rounds in a way that broadcast, to anyone paying attention, that Earl Whitmore was a man who did not handle being wrong well. During the second commercial break, he said something to Steve Harvey that the microphones did not fully catch. A comment about the questions being rigged, and Steve had laughed it off with practiced ease. But Earl's jaw had tightened at the laugh. Nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen next. The slap came at the start of round 3. Steve had just announced the next question. He had moved to the center of the stage, between the 2 podiums, to read it from his cards. Earl Whitmore, standing at the podium to Steve's right, leaned across the divide and, with his right hand swung, the sound was sharp and brief. The audience's gasp filled every square foot of that studio. June Whitmore grabbed her husband's arm and said his name once, loudly, the way you say someone's name when you have run out of other options. The Okafor family on the other side of the stage stood completely still. Steve Harvey stood still too. Then he turned. Slowly, the way you turn when you are deciding, in real time, what kind of person you want to be for the next several minutes. And you want those several minutes to count for something. You just ended yourself, he said. I didn't. 7 words. The most measured 7 words in the history of network television. He took 1 step back from the podium. Not away from Earl, just enough to create a deliberate distance. He turned to the security guards, who were already moving. Hold, he said. Not stop, hold. There is a difference. Stopping them would have ended the moment. Holding them kept it open. He turned back to Earl Whitmore. "You can leave right now," Steve said. "Security will walk you out. No cameras, no footage. Quiet. You can be gone in 30 seconds. Or you can stay and have a conversation. Your choice." He was not loud. He was not shaking. He was the calmest person on that stage, possibly in the entire building, and that calm was more devastating than anything louder could have been. Earl Whitmore stood at the podium. His granddaughter, Lacey, had both hands pressed over her mouth. His wife, June, was looking at the floor. Earl Whitmore did not leave. Steve nodded once. "Okay," he said. He set his host cards down on the podium. He looked at the camera, and then he looked at the audience, and what he said next was not something he had prepared. It was something that came from whatever a man carries inside himself when he has been through enough to have perspective on what is happening to him and still chooses to respond from the best part instead of the worst. "I have been in this business for 30 years, Steve said. "I have been called every name you can think of. I have been underestimated, dismissed, talked down to, talked over, and counted out more times than I can number. And I have one thing to say about every single one of those moments. They made me. Not because they were right. Because I refused to let them define me." He paused. This man just put his hand on my face. On live television, in front of 300 witnesses, and I want you to notice what I am not doing right now. I am not escalating. I am not retaliating. Because I promised God a long time ago, when I was sleeping in a parking lot with nothing, I promised him that if he got me up, I would stay up. And staying up means not coming down to what's being thrown at you. The studio fell completely silent. He looked at Earl Whitmore. "Now," he said, "I want to ask you something. What did you think that was going to accomplish?" Earl was quiet for a long moment. His hands, which had been big and certain at the podium all afternoon, were now at his sides. He looked older than he had 40 seconds ago. "I don't know," he said. His voice was smaller than it had been. Steve said, not sarcastically, almost gently. "That's the problem. You've been doing things for a long time, without knowing what you thought they were going to accomplish." He let that settle. "Let me tell you what that accomplished today. In about 48 hours, this tape is going to be on every screen in America. And when people watch it, what they're going to see is a 74-year-old man making the worst decision of his life in front of his own granddaughter." He looked at Lacey. "I'm sorry you're going through this today, baby. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault." Lacey Whitmore burst into tears. But Steve wasn't done. He turned back to Earl. "I am not going to have you arrested. Not because what you did was acceptable. It was assault, and everyone in this room knows it. But because I think something else is more useful right now." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He dialed. He held it to the studio microphone. A woman's voice answered. "This is the Harvey Foundation. I need you to pull up our contact list for senior community resource centers in Savannah, Georgia. I need someone to reach out to Earl Whitmore's family, his wife, June, and connect her with whatever support she needs, mental health resources, community support, whatever is available. Can you do that?" A pause. "Yes, Steve," he hung up. He looked at June Whitmore. June Whitmore, who had been managing and absorbing and monitoring for 49 years. "Ma'am," Steve said quietly, "whatever you need, whatever your family needs, you call that number. You tell them Steve Harvey sent you." June Whitmore put her hand over her heart and nodded and could not speak. He turned to the Okafor family. "You played a beautiful game today. And I want you to know that what just happened on this stage does not define this space. This stage has seen more love than I can count. Today was one bad moment. The love is still here. He turned to their team captain, a 45-year-old woman named Adize Okafor. Your family is going home with the full prize today. Both families. Because what everyone in this room just witnessed, staying composed when someone tries to take that composure from you, that deserves to be honored. Adize Okafor looked at Steve for a long moment and then said, "God bless you, Steve Harvey." And the audience, 300 people who had been silent with shock, and then silent with grief, and then silent with something that didn't have a simple name. 300 people stood up. All of them. At the same time. And the applause that followed was not the kind game shows usually get. It was the kind that comes when people have just witnessed something true. Earl Whitmore was escorted from the building by security after the taping. He was not charged. Adize Okafor's family publicly declined to pursue charges. 2 weeks later, through a family attorney, Earl Whitmore issued a written public apology to Steve Harvey, to the Okafor family, and to his granddaughter Lacey. The statement said, in part, I have no justification for what I did. I am 74 years old and I know better. The only explanation is that I let something ugly in me that I have never fully confronted come out. I am confronting it now. The clip aired on October 22, 2019. Within 4 days, it had 88 million views. By the end of November, 310 million. The 7-word quote, "You just ended yourself. I didn't," became one of the most shared quotes on social media that year, used in contexts ranging from workplace conflict to political commentary. Reproduced on mugs and posters and inspirational graphics in 17 languages. It was named by 3 separate journalism outlets as the most memorable quote uttered on a network television broadcast in 2019. Steve Harvey addressed the incident 3 weeks later on his radio show. He said, "The hardest thing a person can do is respond to something bad with something good, not because it is weak. Because it costs you something. Every time you choose grace over reaction, you are paying for it with the part of you that just wants to fight back. And I want to tell you, it is worth every cent." Earl Whitmore, as of last reporting, lives in Savannah, Georgia. He is 79. He has resumed attending church. His granddaughter Lacey, now 27, is working as a social worker in the same county. She has said, in one interview, "My grandfather is a different person than he was on that stage. I don't know exactly what changed. I think being seen by somebody, really seen, the way Steve Harvey saw him, did something to him. When someone refuses to throw your worst moment back at you, sometimes that is the only mirror that actually works. Some people need the mirror more than they need the consequence." Steve Harvey understood that on a Friday afternoon in September, with a red handprint fading on his left cheek in front of 300 people who had stopped breathing. He understood it, and he chose the harder, longer, better thing. If this story about those 7 words and everything that happened after them moved you, subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to know that staying composed in your most difficult moment is not weakness. It is the hardest kind of strength there is. Have you ever responded to something cruel with grace and surprised yourself? Tell us in the comments. Ring the notification bell for more stories about the moments that define us.